New concerns for the safety of American pastor Saeed Abedini, sentenced this week to 8 years in Iran's most brutal prison, accused of illegally practicing his Christian faith. Past inmates report beatings and torture and mock executions. One of those inmates was Naghmeh. What is it like inside?
It's living hell. Upon arrival, they blindfold you, then they take you for interrogation, they ask you a few questions, then they never like the answers that you give, then they take you to the torture room, they tie you up, and they torture you.
Case is completely bogus, but once again, the U.S. State Department and the president seem powerless.
So where's the Obama administration? Where's the UN? Where's the State Department?
The Obama administration needs to come out publicly.
Why is the White House not more involved in this case?
I think it's outrageous what we've seen from the State Department so far.
We're not seeing a more aggressive action from our government, and I hope that to see more of that, and not just from our government, but all over the world, because this is a violation of his human rights, and Iran is violating that right, and Iran needs to be accountable to that.
In a letter to his wife, he said he had been beaten. Maybe you ask, what is the secret of being so happy in such a hard situation? Forgiveness and a change of attitude. When we forgive, we become free and we become messengers of peace and reconciliation and goodness. He also talks about not receiving medical treatment for the internal bleeding that he's suffered from beatings. Are you concerned that he will not survive his prison sentence?
Yes, very much. Every day is a battle, a survival battle, and that's why we've been fighting to get him out as soon as possible.
We found out over the weekend we were asked to participate, as well as Naghmeh Abedini, Pastor Saeed's wife, in a hearing before the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, which is completely bipartisan in the House of Representatives. Many of the members of this commission, including the two co-chairs, were part of the bipartisan letter last month to Secretary Kerry asking him to do more. So this is not a Republican-Democrat issue, but instead really Congress and who's doing everything they can, but the administration who's been ignoring them. So we're going to actually be able to testify to present Saeed's case to the House of Representatives, to the commission, and also the State Department's been invited to participate, so they will also be there and subject to the questioning of these members of Congress who have asked for more.
What is really significant when you've got an individual who is facing a death penalty or life imprisonment in these prisons in these countries, which is effectively a death penalty, is to bring the facts of their case to bear and show the human side of what the real consequences of inaction on our government's behalf would result in. And that's what you do at congressional hearings.
The hearing will begin. I want to thank all of you for being here today to discuss the worsening plight of religious minorities in Iran.
Just by way of example, Naghmeh Abedini got to appear before the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission to advocate for her husband's freedom. That was a way that we could be a nexus between the people who signed our petition that were advocating for Saeed's release and members of Congress who wanted to do something but didn't necessarily know what to do. We were able to put those two things together. We were able to have this hearing where Naghmeh went and advocated for her husband's freedom. And as a result of that hearing, more people know the name Saeed Abedini than any other case of religious persecution around the world today.
Just so the commission understands, we've heard from over 500,000 people, actually 512,537 people in just a few weeks that are concerned about his situation.
Actor Woody Allen once said that 80% of success is showing up. Yet even after requesting only 20 minutes of their time for testimony and questions, the Department of State remained unresponsive and ultimately said no. Unfortunately, this is hardly an exception. There's been a disappointment on human rights. This is the second hearing in less than a year that the Commission has convened to highlight human rights abuses in particular countries, abuses which have resulted in the imprisonment of an American citizen. In both cases, the administration seemed disinterested at best. More broadly speaking, there seems to be an inherent bias in the State Department sometimes on these issues that dealing with the issue of faith.
We've had some dialogue with the State Department over the last several months, and I will be honest, Mr. Chairman, it has not been pleasant. The lack of concern, the lack of engagement has been problematic in our work to free Pastor Saeed Abedini. The problem in his case is that the State Department is AWOL. They are absent without leave. They are missing. They did not show up today. They did not show up at the United Nations. They act as if they are embarrassed about Mr. Abedini's faith. Rather, all 27 EU countries at the United Nations called for the release of Pastor Saeed Abedini. the United States was silent.
Someone at the U.S. State Department is taking out references to Saeed Abedini. It is not the Department of Religious Freedom. It is not the ambassador at large, whose office has not yet been fully empowered to engage this situation. And like they did for Pastor Youcef Nadarkani, who they have done more for than they have an American citizen. Yesterday morning, as Naghmeh Abedini was boarding a flight to Washington, D.C., she received a call from the desk officer at Near Eastern Affairs. This is at the U.S. State Department. The desk officer that on the first day she called, within 24 hours of her husband being arrested by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, told her on the phone, there is nothing the United States government can do for you. When that desk officer made the comment, someone from the Department of International Religious Affairs, who works for Ambassador Susan Johnson Cook, tried to break in. This desk officer cut them off, said, I have authority, there's nothing we can do to help. You can keep us updated with the facts if you like. She received the same phone call from that desk officer moments before boarding a plane, after we have informed the U.S. State Department and this officer specifically to stop contacting the client we represent as her attorneys, as the family's attorneys, without us on the phone. Did it moments before her flight and said, you've never asked us for help. You've never asked us for help. Your attorneys may have communicated, you may have been on those phone calls even, but you've never asked us for help. As you can see now, they knew this hearing was about to happen and are trying to cover their tracks.
And I think the State Department's refusal to appear before this committee today is extremely troubling and frankly offensive. It's offensive, and I look at it first from a legal standpoint. Sure, it's offensive from a legal standpoint, but it's offensive to Naghmeh Abedini, the wife of this pastor. And if his children were old enough to understand the scope of what was going on, it would be offensive to them as well. That their government, the State Department, snubbed this commission. And that cannot be seen as anything less than a wanton disregard to stand up and speak out for someone who cannot speak out for himself right now. And I also believe it reveals a stunning lack of concern for protecting human rights and religious freedom. The failure to appear today and to testify, frankly, is inexcusable.
On July 28th, he was taken off a bus by the Revolutionary Guard. He was put under house arrest for 2 months. I remember our kids would continually be able to hear his voice and see him on the computer on Skype. And the day he was taken, and we didn't know where he was for a week, they kept coming to the computer and saying, Mommy, can we see Daddy? Can we hear his voice? And I kept saying, no, we can't. You know, I couldn't explain to them why, that he was physically taken to prison. And finally, they kept saying, does Daddy not love us anymore? Does Daddy not want to hear our voice anymore? And I had to tell them that he was in prison because he loved Jesus and that he loved them very much. And he was looking for the day to come back and tuck him into bed. Our family nightmare began in September of 2012. And we've been fighting for his freedom since. As mentioned earlier, Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, silence in the face of evil in itself is evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act. I must say I'm disappointed with our government. I'm disappointed that our president and our State Department has not fully engaged in this case. Disappointed that this great country is not doing more to free my husband, a U.S. citizen. I expect more from our government. But I'm hoping and I'm asking for help. It was told that I have not asked directly for help, but I've pleaded many times I've asked the U.S. government to do whatever it can to free my husband from that prison simply because he converted from Islam to Christianity and he's a Christian. And his human right is being broken and is being violated. And our family needs your help. Our family needs your support.
But I just want to thank all of the 5 witnesses. Particularly I appreciate, But the commission will stay with this thing until the release takes place.
They were absent without leave. They were AWOL. And that was a message not only to the Congress, but it was also a message to Naghmeh Abedini. And it was frankly a message to our members around the world that the United States government wouldn't travel 2.3 miles down the road to testify to Congress. Now, the truth of the matter is they got a lot of flack for that. And the end result of that was a significant high-level meeting. But their not showing up became a global concern.
When Naghmeh Abedini and Jay and Jordan went before the committee and publicly asked the State Department to do, there was a shift in how they responded. They really had no choice. When the wife of the person who is in prison comes forward and says, my husband's case would be benefited with public attention, with the attention of the United States government on it, they really had no choice but to take that approach. The simple fact is that this hearing shows our system really does work when people speak out. I mean, during the course of a 2.5 hour hearing with just a couple of witnesses, we went from a situation where the State Department didn't even send someone a few blocks down the street to appear at the hearing to a point where they were actually scrambling to meet with Naghmeh Abedini. The chairman of the committee got a phone call during the hearing asking for a meeting with Naghmeh later that afternoon. So the bottom line is, the system works. If enough people speak out and we amplify their voice, results do happen.
What I went in there to do was tell the State Department, we're playing for keeps here. Now, when they ask a family member of Saeed Abedini to do something, fill out a form, then when he goes to fill out that form in Iran, his penalty is not $50 if you don't fill out the form correctly under penalty of perjury. It could be the death penalty himself. So they were asking ridiculous and unnecessary activities from family members. And that's what I had to stop. I had to get a focus in that meeting as to what the government should be concentrating on. And that was asking for his release.
But it was a good meeting. Ambassador Cook is going to be personally involved from here on. And the Bureau of DLR has assured us that they're going to be working on the case, which has not been the case in the past. So that's a big victory, and we're going to hold them to it.
Ultimately, that led to bigger things. That led to eventually, they may not have showed up at the congressional hearing, but ultimately President Obama was making remarks about it. Secretary of State John Kerry was making remarks about it. So ultimately, they did start speaking out.
You had the President of the United States in the first phone call with a senior representative of Iran, in that particular case, a direct call with the President of Iran, and President Obama asked for the release of Saeed Abedini. John Kerry called for the release of Saeed Abedini by name. So at that point, I think it's fair to say that our meeting with the State Department gave direct results. Now, it has not been the end result, which is getting him free, but it did bring about a change of position and a public advocacy now, not just by us, but by the United States government.
We pray for Pastor Saeed Abedini. He's been held in Iran for more than 18 months. Sentenced to 8 years in prison on charges relating to his Christian beliefs. And as we continue to work for his freedom today, again, we call on the Iranian government to release Pastor Abedini so he can return to the loving arms of his wife and children in Idaho.
As a pastor, I am very concerned for Saeed Abedini because they have beaten him and tortured him to try to get him to recant his faith in Jesus Christ, because he believes that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, that Christ died for our sins on the cross, that he shed his blood, that he was raised from the dead. He believes this, and they have beaten him and tortured him to try to force him to turn his back on his Savior, and he won't do it. And the President and this administration have not done what they should be doing to get him out.
The subcommittees will come to order, and this is an important meeting of two subcommittees, the Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, Global Human Rights, and International Organizations, and Subcommittee on Middle East and North Africa.
You know, we started back in March at the Lantos Commission, and now here we are, months later, the United States, in an unprecedented move that we did not predict or could not predict then, is now sitting with Iran. At such a critical juncture, with the U.S. government literally sitting across the table from Iran, we could never have imagined that that would occur when we first testified before the Lantos Commission in March. At the table, for the first time in 34 years, we need to ensure that Pastor Saeed and the other Americans mentioned here today, wrongfully detained, are seen as not a marginal issue, but an essential of those ongoing diplomatic talks. Pastor Saeed has exhausted all legal remedies in Iran to appeal this arbitrary conviction and his detention. His freedom now rests solely on the success of diplomatic efforts by the United States government and world leaders dedicated to human rights. And just to highlight again, that while our government sat across the table from the Iranian delegation, Saeed was transferred to a worse prison.
When I spoke in front of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission in March of this year, I had anticipated that I would battle the Iranian government for my husband's freedom. I never anticipated that I would also have to battle my own government, and that the journey would become even much more difficult than it had been. His parents, when they visit him in prison, they say that when they hold the pictures of the kids in front of him, he just cries. And he wrote in a letter, he said, "It is so hard and so heartbreaking for me to see these pictures and to know that I'm not there beside you as you grow. I came here to help the kids that did not have mommies and daddies, but my own kids lost their daddy. This breaks my heart so much. I want you to know that I did not want to put so much pressure on your little shoulders, my precious children."
Abedini, thank you so very much for those powerful words. And that testimony is just, I think it causes every one of us to redouble our efforts and do everything possible to ensure that your husband is released immediately. So thank you so very much.
And a lot of times when there was a different table and this room was different and the table was here, our dad used to be here swinging us in circles. And that was our favorite, that's our favorite part.
Well, me and my brother and my dad were in the playroom at November 11th, 2009. And we were just taking pictures there, and Jacob was 1 year old and I was 3. My favorite page is this one, because my dad's holding me and it's been a long time since he did.